this thick a crust. Nope, more complicated than we think.
Always more complicated. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the big picture there. And Steve, reflecting back on our past 10 dives here, I think it's 9 dives. Any surprises, any big picture things that you're reflecting on here as we're over midway through our expedition?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, surprises.
He was up pretty late too, you know.
Yeah.
You didn't have somebody spotting him this morning.
Trying to remember what we did yesterday now.
Well, we went up to the top of that gila.
Oh yeah,
we had the bookend shift.
Yeah, that crater was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rim of that crater had some pretty high density communities that I didn't really expect. The most interesting thing to me was, I think, that yellow plexaurid we collected last night. It had a really bizarre growth pattern, kind of running along the seafloor. That's not typical. Usually they grow up in discrete colonies, branching colonies. But that one I'm very curious to look at. And yeah, it's definitely on my list of things to look at after the dive today, after it's been in alcohol for about 24 hours. Some of the structures we used to ID the animals are a little bit more clear. And so take a look at it this afternoon. But I think, I suspect it's among 2 genera in the plexaurids, so I'll take a look at that. But otherwise, cruise-wide, yeah, I think, you know, I'm impressed that Hercules can hold that many rocks and still float from time to time, because definitely takes a toll on your back, lifting those rocks all the way into the wet lab every day and night. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's there's surprising amount of biodiversity we don't see, and sometimes we don't really see that until we get the rock samples. So just out of for curiosity, we take a look at all the rocks when they come in the lab, not just for the crusts and trying to characterize the geology, but we take a look at the attached biology, and at times there's some really interesting biology we don't see at all on the seafloor, but when you look at the rocks more closely, you see things like carnivorous sponges. Last night we saw cup coral at depths we didn't really expect to find them, attached to one of the undersides of the rock. So yeah, there's a fair bit of hidden biology in addition to the stuff that we see, the big charismatic corals and sponges.
Speaking of Hercules carrying more rocks than expected, Jess, has anything surprised you about this expedition overall?
Surprised us about this expedition. The features are really interesting and pretty exciting to fly around. So pleasant surprise about just the features, I suppose, and also the diversity of life down there is pretty exciting. A lot of sponges I haven't seen before. Yeah.
Were you surprised that Hercules could carry so many pounds of rocks? Or did you always believe in him?
I mean, it is named Hercules, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always surprising to see what can fit in a box. Yeah, so that part's always interesting to see what feats. Yeah, what large sizes of rocks can fit into seemingly smaller bins.
I have one for Kalama, if he doesn't mind. And I forgot about this very, very surprising observation because it was not during my watch. I just heard about this afterward. But, and you of course saw this and you were trying to research it, but there was a rock on one of the early dives, which is clearly out of place. Do you have any more information on that?
I didn't get a lot of emails back, honestly, but I mean the general thought is that there might have been some interaction with that, and it most likely would have been the ballast, but I'm not too sure about specifically if it was for a Hawaiian vessel or if it was for another vessel that might have come a little bit later. the maritime history. But if anybody comes back with a solid answer, then we'll definitely check in.
Well, would the voyaging canoes, would they have had rocks like that as ballast? I never really thought of those type of boats as having ballast.
You know, I couldn't answer that for you. I'm limited in my knowledge. I'm very limited in my knowledge in terms of like the maritime history from that age, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something to that effect on board. Yeah.
I guess that makes sense because it would stop the rolling and movement of the ship and make it a smoother ride for everybody.
One thing that I've noticed from experience at least is that like single hull vessels, I mean double hull vessels in themselves are a little more like sturdy and stuff like that, so the single hull vessels are a lot more fun in that sense, for sure.
Fun for some, I guess.
Oh. Yeah.
There was something else too, as I recall. Another watch again, they found a whale bone or a whale skull, right?
Oh, that was us, guys.
That was your watch? Wow.
I believe so. Yeah, and it was a beaked whale.
Yeah, it was the rostrum of a beaked whale, according to scientists ashore.
Yeah. You don't see that every day.
No, you don't.
Definitely not.
I'm curious about this Mark III scoop on the front porch. What happened to Marks 1 and 2?
One of them works on the deck.
Oh, that's a good one.
That was a very good one.
Oh my god.
He pulled that out this early in the morning.
Yeah, that one, you had that in your pocket, I think.
I don't say anything funny, I just say it quickly.
If you're watching or referring to that plastic scoop with the orange handle on there over on the right side of the front porch.
I don't know how you read that. Mark III.
Yeah.
There it is. A bigger screen. And then Renata was referring to our deck chief, Mark.
Said with disappointment.
I got a little question for the front row. So you've got it looks, I guess I'd never noticed this before, but you've got a second manipulator there over on the left. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Do you ever use that? I don't think you've used it so far this cruise, have you?
Not this cruise, but and depends on the situation, I suppose. Sometimes we use it to hang ourselves onto like bumper bars if we're, especially on ONC work, or we're working on these subsea nodes. Where they're holding onto bars, so you can have kind of a counter force as you're plugging in some subsea connectors. And sometimes it can be useful, but it's a bit slower. It's not like the craft, which is on the right-hand side of the vehicle, which is much more agile. This is it's very strong. It's also not very nimble.
If I'm trying to remember my manipulator terminology, but the craft is what is it, a 7-position manipulator, and this is probably a 3, is that right? Or something like that?
This one, I mean, let's see here, 1, 2. Actually, we can jog through it right now if you want. So we have a couple different functions. We have an elbow function. We have a wrist function.
That's 3.
We have a wristing here. Wristing roll. So we have a lot of functionalities on here. It's just that you can see that we have to jostle each individual function one after another. You know what I mean? So
The craft manipulator has this really great smaller version of it that they use to control the main arm, and then this arm that you're looking at is controlled by like a calculator, essentially.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can see it's not very elegant movements.
Right.
So we try to even stow it in an elegant manner.
I think that's
They're not proportional valves, they're just open or closed.
Yeah.
And the name of the manipulator on the left-hand side is...
So we're going through some different names.
But colloquially, it's known as...
Mango.
Mango.
Mango. ISC Magnum?
Magnesia Magnum, it's actually, yeah, apparently it also has 7 functions, although we were calling it a 5-function and the 7-function.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got some.
There's no manipulator out there that has more than 7, right? I mean, that looks like it's pretty dexterous, the one that you got on there, but do they have one that has more than 7 functions?
Oh, probably, certainly. If you add a lot of more joints to it, you can probably get snake-like movements and you get a lot more degrees of freedom that way. But yeah, in this case, having a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist seems to work in both conditions. There are some interesting continuum arms is like think of like a snake-like appendage, if you will. That's increased degrees of freedom of that manipulator.
Interesting.
Jess, a viewer is noting like a patch somewhere on the manipulator arm and wondering if duct tape, how effective is duct tape in the deep sea, or is there a different equivalent?
Oh, for holding things together?
Yeah, for quick patches.
Yeah, so we primarily use like the duct tape that they're referring to is a lot of electrical tape. That seems to hold on to itself, but we use that primarily for flagging things or holding things together that don't see a lot of tension, or for making handles, right? So we can see here for a lot of our stuff is either colored with E-tape or it just makes it easier for us to see. But I wouldn't use it to hold anything together. Not in this condition.
I see you also use polypro line for things, and I guess the main advantage of that is that it floats, so it can pop up and you actually grab it versus sort of regular, what do you call it, other types of rope. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you can see the monkey's fist on the right, which is holding up, which would have our knife attached to it, or has our knife attached to it. That monkey's fist is floating because that line is, yeah, a little bit positive there, and it's buoyancy. Little floaty.
Jake, can you remind us again what the distance between, or the maximum distance between Hercules and Argus is?
The tether's just about 30 meters long.
How close do you keep the two vehicles when you're actually on the seafloor?
It depends if we're like right above. So if Argus is just like right above Hercules, then we're about, I don't know, 15 to 20 meters. But if we're stretched out and we're trying to give some more tether, some more scope for Hercules to roam, then we'll, I'll kind of come down a little bit, and like our vertical distance will be lower. It'll be like 10 to 15 meters. But we're usually stretched out pretty far.
Yeah, that's tether length dependent. So sometimes we have a 50-meter tether. Give us some more distance, but we lose the quality of the video. So Argus doesn't get as good shots because it really can't get as close, because then the tether, which has some floats on it, will end up kind of above Argus and tangly. But we use that sometimes to keep a safe working distance. This is normally when we're doing technical engineering stuff, subsea, mostly for Ocean Networks Canada.
I see. So you basically are trying to avoid damaging any of the instruments on the seafloor, is that right? Use a longer tether?
Sometimes if we're servicing a mooring, so the mooring is on the seafloor and rises up in the water column, and we kind of want to stretch Hercules out, so we're in a safe spot. We don't have Argus too close to that mooring because it would be in a tangle zone. But also when we're working in the hydrothermal vents, it can be advantageous to not have Argus so close and kind of like in the pinball zone, so to speak. It's nice to be above it.
Subsea pinball.
Subsea pinball.
An idea.
So do you know who came up with the concept of a camera sled? I mean, where I used to, or where most of my career was, the Hawaii Undersea Laboratory, we had a very sort of ancient RCV 150 ROV, which had a cage, and the ROV would swim out of that. But then the more modern, was this Mbari or some other organization, the more modern ones Well, I think Mbari actually had a float, and they didn't even have a camera sled for quite a while in the early days. But who came up with this? I think it's almost an optimal configuration because your camera sled can keep your ROV and the tether out of trouble because it sees everything.
Yeah, I would think that it doesn't. It's not as useful for like from what I've seen, industry, so oil and gas, they use more single body systems. So I would suspect, given the clear picture that we get and kind of the cinematic, I would suspect it's from scientific operations, and given the time frame, just shot in the dark, it would probably be Lamont Doherty, Woods Hole, or Scripps.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe a lot of oil and gas, they have heave compensation on their winches too. So it kind of removes the need for a two-body system.
And then some of them do have a two-body system. It's just a TMS, tether management system. I think that's what it's called.
Right.
So,
But I don't remember
but there's no camera on it necessarily.
I don't remember Jason having a sled, if you will.
Jason did. It had Medea,
Oh.
and then now they're a single body.
Oh,
Well, I think they can operate in both modes, but more frequently and recently it's been single body. And Jess, if you have anything.
Not yet. That's correct.
So I wonder if that's because they containerize their system, because they will put it on different ships, and it's they can put everything in one container. And if you add another vehicle and everything that goes with it, I suppose that would be a little more difficult to make it, basically to mobilize the system.
I think so, and I think Ropos has been really successful in their single body heave compensated crane winch model. So I think that's been kind of noticed and used by other systems.
Stuff is fascinating to me. Like just the technology. It's a wonderful time to be alive, I think, and just experience all of this.
Yeah.
See what people have figured out.
Well, yeah, and then the safety element. I mean, this putting humans down, and you have a limited amount of time, and then there's always a factor of safety and whatnot. This is kind of, and you know, you'll have cameras and whatnot, but you often have small portholes for deep operations. This is kind of, I understand it takes a bit of the spatial awareness away, and obviously the feeling and because of that feeling, some of the information that you absorb. For scientists, that could be important to physically be there. But being tethered and having HD cameras all around can certainly, and being able to broadcast it all live is, you know, pretty special.
Yeah, well, one advantage, I guess, I come from the submersible world, and so the ROV world, I entered that world about, I don't know, about 7 years ago or so. But I can tell you from some of the work that I did that the submersible does have advantages for doing fisheries surveys. And typically we're surveying along extremely steep terrain, and we're doing long contour surveys. And we would set up on any given dive a series of 4 along contour transects where we're counting and identifying fish that were at different depths. And we could cover easily 1 kilometer in 30 minutes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so this is something an ROV can't do, but most of the time you don't want to do that. I mean, the fish we were seeing were big. They were big snappers. Observers could see them and identify them and count them very easily. And that was the idea, to cover a lot of ground very quickly. But the imagery that you get from these ROVs for these deep dives, which are not particularly fisheries based, is just extraordinary. The fact that you can zoom in on a coral polyp and see the microscopic skeletal parts in the stalk of the polyp is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it seems like there's a shift that, okay, well now we can use human occupied vessels for what they're good for, and use ROVs for what they're good for, and you know, AUVs for what they're good for, and hybrids as well. Kind of.
Why do you have to have one tool? Why can't you have a suite?
Exactly.
Just like you in your garage or something. You're going to have a variety of tools to do what you need to do. So
I've always been wondering about if you could have a hybrid AUV ROV, but I know there are physical constraints on data transfer, right? That's
Oh,
pretty much
well,
the
we've
big thing.
got one coming on. Nui.
Yeah.
So Nereid under ice.
Under ice, yeah.
And there used to be, this is out of Woods Hole. Nereus is also a famous one that, rest in peace. Yeah, so it's a ROV that runs on, it's not powered from the ship. It runs on its own battery system. And so the only thing then that you need to connect it to the ship is fiber, so communications. So it's just a loose fiber. And then at some point, if you'd like to, if that fiber gets severed purposefully or, or not, it can go into AUV mode and kind of be independent.
I always thought if I had a hybrid AUV ROV, I'd probably call it Pinocchio, because it's got no strings.
Oh, wow.
Oh, God. Good.
Get this man off the naming committee.
First bad pun before 9 a.m.
You know how long
Party
I've been
foul.
waiting to set that one up until...
Yeah.
You're like, can we talk about...
He's back there with a chessboard and like, I think today's the day. We just moved this pawn here.
Today's the day. We're going to throw Steve over the side.
We're all playing bingo. He's playing chess.
Yeah.
Like, keep it interesting.
He's playing 4D chess. Move my pawn tomorrow.
I remember a number of years ago that the Shinkai, I think it was Shinkai 6500, I think was the name of the submersible. And now I'm trying to remember the story, but they were testing.
Japanese sub?
Yeah, the Japanese sub. They were testing a fiber optics connection for a submersible, which could then broadcast the video live. And in that configuration, and I think they took it out for their maiden voyage, and they're making a big news story about the whole thing. And something happened, and that fiber broke pretty quickly. It was extremely thin fiber, and so wound up that the show was mostly somebody holding up a model of the Shinkai 6500, showing what it was doing. Steve, do you remember this story?
No, I've heard of similar stories, but not that one.
Yeah, because now you can't see what the submersible's doing without the cable.
Yep.
And so they were hearing about it from the pilots in the audio, and then somebody was trying to hold up a model to sort of show it, because now they couldn't show the live video. So it was a bit of a bust, and I never heard of them trying that again.
We, there was I was on an Alvin cruise off Southern California a couple years ago where there was a GEMS-Tech team out that was testing this new way to send video through the water column from Alvin to the surface, and that was really, really neat. There was a bit of a lag, but you could get some reliable pace of images that it did form somewhat of a video.
We worked off of Southern California with the Abyss lander, which I think is from the Gurgis lab, but was partnering, I think, with NASA with an optical modem. And it was pretty cool. So the lander was essentially just a standalone entity that had power that we had lowered down. And then it had an optical modem, a means of passing information through light. And we had a receiver on Hercules, so we dove down, and as we approached the lander and lined up correctly, the lander had a HD camera on it. So it was sending us a video of ourselves through the water column to Hercules, which we were then sending up to the ship and broadcasting live as well as part of our feed. And so it was kind of just, it was interesting that there was a gap. There was at one point in that no cable connection, and it was subsea, just transmitting.
Well, we were doing that with Nui back in September.
Yeah. And
they were sending actually multiple streams, not HD, but They were sending, what, 5 streams back over an optical modem to Argus that then came up to Nautilus to broadcast to the world.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And it was, yeah, they were controlling the manipulator and everything with.
So what are the implications of fiber like that? Does it degrade over time, and what's the expense of that? I've never really understood that. Any ideas from that team?
So thin fiber, right? Jess might be better. What's the cost of fiber per foot nowadays?
Good question. I mean, it's not terribly sure, honestly.
The cost per foot for fiber is actually relatively cheap. It's what you've wrapped it in.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have little yellow fiber jumpers all over the span, and they're, you know, I don't know, 50 cents a meter. We probably pay $15 for a jumper, a 1 meter jumper, but that's got connectors on both ends. The actual cost of the fiber is virtually nothing. But if you look at the fact that, in essence, the 6/8 that's going down to the vehicles is 3 fiber optic cables, it's pretty bloody expensive.
Right.
So it's all of that, you know, how well do you want to protect the fiber? The fiber is very fragile, needs some sort of cladding, needs cladding also for the reflection inside the fiber. But yeah, do you want to throw it away at the end of the day, or do you want to roll it up and use it again?
Was there cladding on the NUI fiber, or was it?
No, that stuff was actually basically the same stuff that we're running, you know, that's right above your head. If you look up to that snake skin that's going between Van A and Van B, there's 12 fibers in there.
Oh.
And it was basically that same fiber.
You know, it's kind of interesting about the Nereus, and it's really unfortunate that the thing imploded in the Kermadec Trench.
Yeah.
But so when you're diving in the trench and you're going down, you know, 9 kilometers or something like this, you can't just use a standard ROV cable because the weight of the cable at those depths is enormous and it impedes the vehicle. And so that's, I think, the reason why they came up with this whole really thin, lightweight fiber optics cable where you could dive all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench or some of these other trenches and you wouldn't have that problem. You know, it was more fragile, of course, and it could break, but there wasn't really any solution. I don't think the cable on this ship would allow, if this ROV was capable of diving to 9,000, 11,000 meters, I don't think it would work. And that's all my understanding. Is that where you guys, is that your understanding too, up front?
Not quite sure. Pretty much only familiar with these depths and our current capabilities.
But that's the other reason why they were experimenting with those ceramic spheres in the Nereus as well, just trying to reduce the weight and come up with a different buoyancy system. And it still is unknown whether or not one of those spheres failed, and that's what caused the implosion, or whether there was a problem with the main instrument bottle seal or something like that.
Yeah, I remember it being the ceramic spheres. One of them imploded, and then it was like a chain reaction.
That's
the rest of them imploded.
That's what they thought, but they only ever recovered, I think, little bits.
Yeah.
There's actually a really nice op-ed about it. Someone wrote up. It's kind of sad to read. You personify these vehicles often. But
I cannot even imagine the sensory experience of some deepwater animal who was there in the vicinity of the Nereus when it imploded. When you're going from the pressure at approximately 9,000 meters to 0 in seconds or something, I don't know. I can't even imagine what it would have been like.
Jess, you've obviously spent a significant amount of time and energy thinking about kind of the current and future of technology in water. Is there anything that's particularly exciting to you about upcoming or new ocean exploration tech?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, because there's so many interesting and cool, exciting kind of frontiers of ocean exploration tech. Whether it's the kind of use of, I think one big frontier is going to be the use of AI and a lot of computer vision. Yeah, it's I guess it's pretty loaded. Either whether it's using like data processing or more of autonomous data logging, things like this. I think that's one big frontier. Also, the material space has a lot of definite areas for innovation and improvement. Whether it goes to, more innovative types of flying experiences. So if you have silent thrusters is one area of development, which I'm no expert in, but it seems like a very useful way to get better, more kind of undisturbed marine life observations.
Or like electric only subs.
Saab just released a all-electric vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
So front row, collectively, if you had $5 million, what are your top 3 improvements you would make to Herc right now that would turn it into the vehicle of the future?
Interesting.
The monorail.
And you can change that number too. This is just hypothetical.
So we can increase the number to make it.
But no more than like 10 million.
Inertial nav. That'd be cool.
What's that?
So we have a variety of ways of knowing where we are, but one way to, I guess, optimize and hone that in is to have a navigation system that uses the inertial movement of the vehicle. So ballistics uses it, or AUVs to kind of finally track, but that's overkill, kind of. That'd be nice if we were doing some extremely high res mapping. But as far as knowing where the vehicles are, we're pretty knowledgeable that it's directly below the ship somewhere.
But don't you have to deploy some type of transmitters or beacons or something for that to work?
No, that would just be sensors inside that are able to detect minor changes in attitude and movement, velocity.
You still have to be correct in your periodic sort of ground truthing your position. My understanding is you can do that for a while and then you have to recalibrate or reset it, don't you?
It is dead reckoning, much like our Doppler velocity log, the downward facing ADCP that we use once we're at the bottom, and dead reckoning degrades over time. Just for the audience, if I was to tell you to step forward 1 meter west, and then you only did 0.99 and you were slightly, northwest, say, over time those errors stack and you think you're in one point and you're not, so you need to reset it to something. So we have multiple navigation systems to do that. Inertial nav can help with that.
Okay, what else would you do with $10 million?
I would update the manips, honestly. I would get 2 new manips on there, shilling or something like this.
You mean 777 function or higher?
Or higher. Yeah, I would update Mango, and I would update the craft and make a pretty swell.
Maybe bubble cam, so it's younger than me.
HD cameras all the way around.
Yeah.
That's the easy one for me. HD cameras all the way around. And a 4K, a real 4K camera up front.
I'm sure the back row is like, more space, more boxes.
Yeah, PVC tubes. There we go. Quivers, please.
Yeah.
You're easy to please.
Yeah, how many
places to put things. Yeah.
What can you buy with how much PVC can you buy with $5 million?
Very, very futuristic.
Oh. Steve, what is it, or what are your thoughts on kind of the AI tech and data analysis, automated processes? Do you feel like you're going to be put out of a job?
Yeah, no, well, yeah, I keep saying that. But,
PowerPoint.
Yeah, upgrading PowerPoint.
Coffee's kicking in for Jake.
He's got callbacks for days.
What would you do, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I think we're a little optimistic about what AI can do for these types of data analyses, seafloor video assessments, but there are some strategies for improving identifications of things that don't involve video. Like there's some proposals on the table for using different types of machine learning to advance taxonomy and identification of specimens, but you still physically need to get the specimens. And I really think we're a long way off before before computers can really tell apart species of some of these deep water corals that I study. Probably at least that for sponges, since they seem to be a bit more variable. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're not there yet, anywhere near it.
Mm. But I've been chatting with colleagues about some interesting machine learning proposals for taxonomy on some of these problematic groups like plexaurids to use machines to tell us the boundaries between species and algorithms. And that's kind of interesting because you have a lot more mass of data. But yeah, I'm a supporter, but I think it's a ways off yet.
I'm remembering you talking about if you could zoom in on a lot of this HD video, you'd see all kinds of life.
Oh yeah,
much smaller.
There's a ton of hidden
like
diversity. Remember an ROV for as big and as expensive as it is, it's basically a microscope. It's just a big microscope. And if you were to take a finer microscope, finer camera system to the sea floor where you could look on the surface of rocks more closely, you would find totally different life down there.
I think we're getting close to our target here, but I just wanted to... Okay.
Wondering whether we could hear a little bit more about where we are. I'm not sure where we are. Do you know where we are, Kalama?
Thanks for the segue there, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so we are currently, the expedition is currently taking place within the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. I mean, gosh, for all of our listeners at home, or for all of the viewers at home, if y'all are interested in sort of learning a little bit more about the monument, from the two specific sites that I can think of, are one that's the one that I'm looking at right now, which is done by NOAA. That's papahanaumokuakea.gov. And then another one, which is a site that's orchestrated by one of the co-trustee entities, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You can go to oha.org/papahanaumokuakea. I'm actually currently looking at a page about the proposed marine sanctuary or national marine sanctuary designation for the monument that's going on. And so I believe Andy Collins, our NOAA representative on board, was sharing that this is an opportunity. Well, the commenting period is open right now, and I believe that they're taking comment through the end of January. And so if you guys have a chance, you guys can go check it out, papahanaumokuakea.gov/sanctuary designation. From a cultural perspective, the name Papahanaumokuakea was a name that was decided by the cultural working group and the nomenclature hui. The cultural working group is a voluntary group of various stakeholders from all different walks, from all different specialties within Hawaii. As we look into the name, it joins two names of like our most prominent ancestors / gods or akua, whatever your preferred term is. And so the first half being Papahanaumoku, which is the personification of like the earth, and then Akea or Wakea, which is the expanse of the sky. I guess one thing that I guess that I've forgotten to sort of explain this whole time is that Papa and Wakea are actually they're like generally the first. They're like the parents of like the Hawaiian nation and stuff like that. But before them, I mean, what, 2 weeks later, but they actually gave birth to all of the to the archipelago first before humans came along. Yeah, so the use of this name from a cultural perspective helps to ground us in our genealogical ties as Native Hawaiians to this place. Yeah, and as an understanding of our history through the framework of genealogy. Specifically in Papahanaumokuakea, it's perceived as one of the more as like a sacred realm or area, as like sort of denoted by like the the general path of the sun. So in Hawaiian thinking, life starts in the east with the youngest islands being, of course, the main archipelago. And as we transition across the sky and across going up northwest, we now transition into another plane. So the realm of like our ancestors who have passed, as well as the Akua, or our deified ancestors as well. And the physical, sort of like the physical boundary of those two realms is basically is on the Tropic of Cancer, which goes across the island of Mokumanamana. And the Hawaiian name for the Tropic of Cancer is Kealapolohivanui Kane, or the dark shining path of Kane. And so that's actually the physical limit of the sun, the highest limit of the sun travel. So we are literally on the other side of the realm of light, or all, if you will. And then in the realm of Po, and so Po actually is like is described as like this deep primordial darkness from which we all emerge and will return back to. And so in that sense, right, like Maiko Po Maiko Oi, they say, or like from darkness comes the truth, but that's actually a place where the gods and our ancestors reside. So Papahanaumokuakea itself culturally is very important to Native Hawaiians, both in all aspects and stuff. I've been kind of looking back into some of our other oral histories that have been some of our recorded histories and stuff like that. And if we're looking up into places like Kuehelani or Komoku or Komohoali'i, these are actually places that were that our ancestors lived in. And so Kuehelani is specifically a very important place culturally and historically, and it's seen as the home of a lot of these ancestral gods and stuff. And so, for instance, like a chief by the name of Kenin Ulo Kalani, Aukelinui Aiku, they all reside there. And I was doing some of the cross-referencing for the other chiefs that were around that time. This is at least in some perspectives, like at least the 15th century and stuff like that. And so, and then I was thinking about it too, right? So if you think people in our society live in the main Hawaiian Islands now, but back then, or X amount of years ago, right, the Papahanaumokuakea was generally the place that was I don't know, that place where all of these ancestors are living and stuff. And so for me, it's an interesting thing to think about. It's like we just start transitioning through time and a succession of our histories from there. But otherwise, just to sum it up, Papahanaumokuakea, super sacred, very beautiful place, and actually an interesting place for all of our disciplines and sort of expertise to be converging in that the framework and the foundations that the preservation of the monument places both cultural as well as other disciplines and other means of and other knowledge systems as like being very much equal. So I see that as a very big step for a lot of other indigenous communities and how we preserve our places and stuff.
Mahalo, thank you.
Yeah.
Getting our first view here of Euphemia Seamount.
Oh, we're here already.
Yes.
Go log on bottom. I'll give you a quick Doppler reset on the way.
Steve, could you take a grab right here? Just helps me know where to clip the tracking file.
All right, come on down.
Yeah.
Quick Doppler here.
Roger. For those of you who haven't seen the start of a dive on the seafloor, there's going to be a number of operational activities here. So we get the video set, and the ROVs oriented.
All right, you're good for your Doppler, and we'll do a better one at the bottom.
Roger that. Thanks, Rennie.
Yep.
How's the USBL looking today?
Looks much better. Thank you for asking.
All right, and we do have a
That's good there, Jake.
bit of a cultural protocol we'll be doing here in a moment. Let us know when you're ready.
Actually, never mind.
Sure, we'll let you know.
We are at 1,668 meters beneath the surface.
Well, I'm a little disappointed not to see animals all over the place. So
Oh, you want animals right away?
Yeah, absolutely.
We did have one dive, NA101. I remember we went down, the sponges everywhere, and Chris was losing his mind.
Yeah.
It's out of his gourd back there.
And I never recovered it either, I don't think.
Are those some cup coral we're looking
There's
at?
something down there. Yeah, they look like cup corals.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Can't have all the excitement in the first minutes. We gotta build.
Well, this is different. I don't think we've ever seen whatever this is. Anemones are. I think you're right. I think they're cup corals. We haven't seen that right off the bat.
Yeah.
Landed.
Would you like us to get set up first with all our stuff, or do you want? We're in a good spot here if we want to do the.
Let's go ahead and ground ourselves in our cultural protocol. So for those who are familiar with this, we're going to be going offline. For those who are new to the beginning of a watch and the beginning of a dive, we're in a place right now where we're going to be grounding ourselves, conducting a silent and private conducting a private ceremonial protocol that acknowledges and honors the biocultural resources that are present on the seamount that we'll be interacting with and impacting. We will be going silent here, but we'll be back with you shortly. And at this time, I'm going to invite everyone in the control van to go ahead and mute your microphone.
Yeah. It's that fourth line that always gets me. That's the hardest one, I think, of the whole chant.
If it makes you feel any better, every Latin name that we've heard so far is the hard one for me.
So I do feel better now.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the most common questions I get is, how do you spell that? Latin names.
It's a good question.
So we have some beginning operational activities here. This is where Jeff gets to set the stage for all the video for this dive. All right, go ahead, Jeff.
Is the porch off? Porch lights off?
Porch light is on. You want it off?
Yes, please. You know what? Take that back. I want it back on.
That dark screen is intentional here as we set our cameras. So we have some viewers a little thrown off by the presence of Chris Kelly on our watch today. We're really excited to have him with us, giving Beth Orcutt a little bit of a break. She's been working around the clock between samples and watches. So thanks, Chris, for being here today. Chris, question, are you going to be pulling a double duty today,
Thanks,
or
Jess.
are you missing your regular shift?
I'm not missing my regular shift. I assume that I'll be just sitting in for Beth for a while this morning until she gets a little bit more rest and so forth. I expect that those of you who are Beth fans are going to get treated to Beth a little bit later on during this shift.
Thanks, Chris. Great to have you.
Those would be microbiome type people.
Yeah, we do have a lot of ferromanganese nodule fans.
Yep.
Beth did say she wrapped up most of her sampling. She has enough samples for her project on this cruise. So yeah, she sent out an email that said that for the most part, the forward bio box is now free for lots of corals and sponges if wanted. No, I invented that last part. But
Chess player and fibber.
I also thought I saw Beth shooting away with a small boat. No.
So
yeah,
the rock people are in real trouble because you got 2 biologists up here today. Boy, let's just skip rock collecting altogether.
Uh-oh.
No.
we're pretty well wrapped up here. Just as we finish up, let's get a thought on what we want to proceed with. So Argus is facing southwest right now. We've got a little bit more of the ridge. I don't expect too much in that direction. And then once we're kind of at the top, I think it looks like as I zoom out on HiPAC, and Chris, you can correct me if you've got some other plans, but we'll be going kind of in the southwest direction along the top of this here.
That's the plan.
All right.
But we would like to get a look at these little cup corals before we head off on our trek.
Roger that.
All right, go ahead, Jeff.
So now you'd want to see the base of these, is that right, if possible?
Well, just a little bit closer. I think right now we're still on the fence as to what they are.
You can usually see the calcium carbonate through the tissue, but I would lean to anemones for these.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not seeing any of those septa or anything you typically see if it was a cup coral. But they're kind of weird anemones.
What are you thinking for the bearing there, 150?
Quite transparent, and then I think you could actually see the mesenteries in there, that kind of orange puffy stuff over on the. Oh. You never know what you're gonna find.
Never know.
Come down here.
First life here on the seafloor.
All right, good captures on those.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure thing, full wide. All right, I'm ready for you, Rennie.
All right, yeah, let's ascend up and see how much leash we got and if we can see the top of the ridge.
So Chris, as you're exploring, I'm imagining your eyes are
So before I do, I want to take that route.
focusing on things a little differently than Beth. She's, tend to look at the geology. What are you scanning for? What's catching your eye as you're watching these screens?
Well, you may find this a little unusual, but usually when we land, I try to look for rocks, collecting rocks. In my experience, a lot of times we would collect a rock right off the bat and get one in the box. This project, this cruise, has a very strong geologic component. So even though I'm a biologist, I'm looking at that. And then the other part of it is I like to identify sort of everything we can that's down on the site. So usually I look for animals to do a close-up, at least of one example of that animal, and then from that point on we can kind of know what it is from a little further away. We don't have to get close-ups on every one of them. So I look for targets like that, anything that's on the bottom, and that just helps us describe the community down here as well.
That's great. We have over 100 active viewers here on Nautilus Live, and the general comments and viewing are, and then we also have a separate science chat at shore. Are you able to track between the screens and communicating with your scientists ashore during the dives pretty well?
Yeah, there's no one on right now, but it is Sunday.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. We need to zoom in on this, and this is a potential collectible dump.
Oh yeah, sure. Starting off strong here, Chris, are we?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see one of these because it's the first time we've seen them. And this guy can swim, if you believe that.
Really?
He did it the first time we tried to collect it, it swam away.
All right.
Off on you.
But let's
Is
take
this
a
an
look
Idarian?
It's a Serianthid is what we think it is. It's got an internal oral ring of tentacles. If you were to come in a slightly different orientation from the right, you would see this oral ring of tentacles. But let's zoom in on it first before I get too excited and start hyperventilating.
Calm down back there.
Yeah.
So you see that sort of dark patch right under?
Yeah.
Right there. Those are the oral tentacles, I believe. It's hard to see in amongst all their other tentacles.
What did you call this again, Chris?
we don't know the name of it. We just believe it's in that group, the Ceriantherians, but it's a very unusual one. The only other thing it could be, it'd be some type of hydrozoan, which is also very unusual. But most Ceriantherians are tube anemones, and they like to live in the sand, and they'll secrete a tube home, if you will, down in the sand that they can retract into when there's some danger to them. This guy's on a rock. He perches kind of like an anemone on a rock. It's like this weird sort of hybrid between a tube anemone and an anemone.
Did it have a suction cup base? Is that
Sorry, guys. Do you want
we don't know anything
sample
about
for this guy, or?
I would like to collect it if it's possible.
Yeah, let's do it.
We just don't see these very often, and our first collection event was pretty unsuccessful. But as I can tell you, he did get up and swim, so be aware of that.
Beware of the swim ring. Okay, Raj.
It was slow. It wasn't like it was fast swim, but they're really hard to grab out of the water column is the point. And
could we grab the whole rock that it's on?
he would swim off of it probably if that's common. I mean, again, I've only seen this once because I personally have only tried to collect one of these ones.
See if we can sneak around from the back side here.
Was that on NA101? I'm kind of having, remembering that.
It wasn't 101. It was on one of the Okeanos cruise.
Something similar then.
We should have a look back later, because I'm reasonably certain we collected one of these from the Line Islands.
Yeah,
back in
maybe that
was
2019. Yeah,
I think.
but I mean, it could be worth another collection.
Yeah.
I remember it very well because all the tentacles popped off.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
We were processing
Right.
it, and it was right
in the lab, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you think we collected it, we can pass on it. It just
I don't want to pass up the opportunity if it's something, because it'd take me a few minutes to look up, more than a few minutes to look up that collection, but it's your call. The one we preserved in 2019, if it is this, we didn't formalin fix it, so if you want something for morphology, this could be a
well, yeah, that would be a
comparison.
very good reason to get one. And it's clearly a new species, even if there's been one
Yeah, there you
previous.
go. There's a good view of those.
Yeah, those oral
tentacles. Yeah.
There's a nice shot of that oral disc there.
Do you want to zoom in?
If we
Yes,
could get it
please.
on the rock, that would be like the best case
Jeff.
scenario.
What do you think well, we could try that.
Because then it wouldn't get all smashed up.
Yeah, see, there's the dark. There they are. That's beautiful, right there. So those inner ring of tentacles are one of the characteristic features of this group, the Ceriantherians, or the tube anemones. And it's just a magnificent animal if you look at this. They occur in Hawaii, and they occur in the Pacific, and we just don't know what it is.
So what are you guys thinking? Should I slurp it, or if you say it's going to swim away, then probably don't want to collect the rock it's on?
Well, could you try the rock? I mean, I would sort of be interested to see if this one swam too, frankly, even if we missed it, because that's such a weird behavior, a tube anemone that swims. That's
Yeah.
Okay.
Breaking all the rules.
Yeah.
All right, full wide there, please.
Yeah, if we slurp it, I have a feeling it'll start to
break up.
Yeah.
Let's try the rock thing.
Okay.
Then if it swims, you'll get a real treat anyway. It'll be a very visual treat.
And
Did the tentacles retract when you touched it last time?
Nope. Because they were used to swim, because it's just a stalk and tentacles. And how would you, I mean, I just don't know of.
Oh, it wasn't like jetting.
No, it wasn't jet.
so I would also say if we could grab it as a grab sample, since Beth doesn't need forward boxes anymore, I would suggest to put it in the forward box. Only because it has a better seal.
It doesn't look like that rock wants to go, guys.
Oh.
Now I just abused the poor puppy.
He doesn't look like he's really eager to swim off. Wait, is he going to go? Can't really see.
It's just us moving around, I think.
Okay.
So do you want to slurp this guy then?
What do you think, Steve? How did you collect it if you think you collected it in the Line Islands?
With slurp.
with slurp?
Yeah, yeah. It was it worked. It's messy.
You might.
Yeah, you
Would
get
you
it.